So welcome Year 11 to this lecture on your historical investigation. So now that we have covered a significant amount about historians, how historians use sources, how to analyze sources and check that they're reliable and deconstruct them for information, we are now going to apply that in a more practical way by choosing a topic that interests you and then being a historian and looking for sources and constructing your own argument about the past. Beyond that, further purpose of the historical investigation is in you developing critical thinking skills, learning to solve problems, and becoming really creative in how you seek out and then present information in the form of an argument about the past. So the next obvious question is, well, how do I plan my historical investigation? So I would like you to be really excited by this unit. It's a chance for you to take control of what you learn, instead of me just handing you a textbook or going through a slideshow and saying we are going to cover this information today in class. You get to explore an event, a person, a debate, an issue or a conundrum that fascinates you, and that's quite broad. So where do you really start? And step 1 is going to be deciding on a topic. There are 6 ways that you can develop a topic that you'd be interested in. The first is looking at a personality. Alternatively, you could look at events, or you could look at a theme. You could also look at an area of historical debate, a historical site, or a representation of history. Once you've chosen a topic, you really need to think about why you're interested in that topic. We are going to be doing an historical investigation for 6 weeks of class time. So that's 4 1-hour lessons for 6 weeks. You can do the maths. You'll also be doing things at home. You'll also be convincing me that this topic is something I should let you use all that time on. And if you're not interested, then you are going to have a very miserable 6 weeks. So I would suggest that you choose a topic that really ignites some sort of curiosity within you so that you can sustain the investigation. Also, choosing a topic that has some different perspectives could be useful because you can explore the topic from a range of viewpoints and compare the differences. So you could also get into perspectives from historians because sometimes they see things from different angles. If you are interested in pursuing history extension in Year 12, this would be a really good chance for you to practice what we call historiography, which is looking at where historians have some sort of debate around history and they both use evidence to back up their perspectives, and so you could practice examining the historians' perspectives in preparation before we throw you in the deep end for history extension. Okay, so without further ado, you've got your topic. Now, how do you get from topic to question? Well, firstly, let's look at some HSC questions for structure. So, assess the effectiveness of Australian foreign policy in responding to changing relations with the wider world in the period 1945 to 1983. An assess question is a judgment question. This is exactly the sort of question that you'll be doing for your historical investigation. The topic is Australian foreign policy, and then we're looking at a scope of 1945 to 1983. A scope in a question is very important because it helps limit you so that you're not talking about every single development in Australian foreign policy since we became a nation, because that, firstly, when we became a nation is an area of historical debate, and also that's just simply too much for you to adequately deal with in an essay. So a scope is very useful to help drive your research and drive your answer to a few key ideas or key events. This next question is also an assess question. We're assessing the role of Gandhi in the movement towards Indian independence. So if we're looking at Indian independence as the topic and then Gandhi as the scope, that means that you're not talking about other leaders of the Indian independence movement, only at Gandhi, which is important because there's a lot going on in the Indian independence movement. So having that limitation of only talking about it in relation to Gandhi will help you structure a more cohesive, coherent response. Our final question is a to what extent question, which is slightly different, although you are still making a judgment. So, to what extent did racism create social tension in US society in the period 1919 to 1941? So, the directive is a to what extent, where you will make a judgment. We're looking at racism in US society in that specific time period. So if you start talking about Martin Luther King in the 1960s, then you've gone beyond the scope of the question. You're not addressing it. So you can see how that scope really informs not just your research, but also your essay at the end. So now how do we get from A to B as such? So pick your topic, whether that's a country, a person, or an event, or something else. Then what about that topic you really want to learn about? So you can't do all of Australian history. Pick an element of Australian history that's interesting to you. And then put a scope, such as a time frame, to ensure your topic is not too broad. And that will help you get a really tightly worded question to answer. So does that make sense? I really don't expect that this completely makes sense, because it doesn't really until you actually started trying to write questions and structure them and things like that. So don't panic. We will work on this. Okay, so for your question, give yourself some guidance, including an element of assessment, evaluation, some degree of yes or no will help you structure your response. And also, if you're writing a peel or a teal or a petal paragraph, your L, your link, will always link back to that question, and so should always contain some form of assessment, and that will help the marker know that you've answered your question. So we're looking at a Bloom's taxonomy here, and your question really needs to fall into the analysing or evaluating end of the taxonomy. So you're not just going to be describing or explaining why or how things happened, but really making some sort of judgment or understanding how all the parts relate to each other in order to really achieve that higher order thinking. Now, there are a few things that you absolutely can't do. So you can't do the fall and decline of the Romanov dynasty, the origins of the Arab-Israeli conflict. You can't do China in the period 1927 to 1949, apartheid, and you can't do World War II, because we will be covering these either in your prelim or your Year 12 course. However, if you wanted to do post-apartheid, you can, or if you want to do China before that time period, you can do that. That's fine. So here are some question starters that you can use. I don't expect you to come to class with a fully formed question. What I do expect is that after you watch this video, you sit down and write some topics that you might be interested in pursuing. Don't just have one, try and have a couple in case some of them are not viable. And come to class ready to sit down and write a question. So best of luck to you, and I'll see you in class.